Greetings and welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of UC Weekly News. I'm your host, David Danto, and I have an old friend on to chat with me to help me figure out what's going on in the world. It's always so hard to do. Ron Insana, thank you very much for joining me. Ron and I go back to the earliest days of Financial News Network, or not the earliest, but the second earliest days of Financial News Network. What are you doing nowadays, Ron?
Well, after getting over that experience, and then of course spending a lot of time at CNBC, currently I'm a guest contributor at MS Now. I'm on the speaking circuit. I've got a Substack called The Message of the Markets, which mirrors the title of a book I wrote many, many years ago. And looking at some interesting opportunities potentially in streaming media that I think our industry is once again ripe for disruption. Given what's happened in the last couple of days, God knows what's going to happen in the news business. So
We are all content contributors at this point, and probably we have more validity than half the people that are going to own broadcasting going forward. So who the heck knows?
I
Going to
don't
be
disagree with that. Yeah,
you're going to be underground broadcasters nowadays. So I'll have to see how
like
that
pirate
turns out.
radio, right?
Something like that. Yeah, pirate video, pirate streaming. Good point. So I asked Ron to join me here to have a quick conversation because I don't understand what's going on in the world of AI and what I'm referring to as funny money. Because I think back when I think back to the subprime crisis, when people were taking things that had value and repackaging them and reselling them and collateralizing them with things that were other people's. It got to this weird thing where as soon as a butterfly flapped its wings the wrong way, we had the housing crisis. And I'm starting to get that feeling in my back where it's getting a little bit itchy that's happening again here because most of the deals we're seeing with some of the larger AI platforms, with some of the chip manufacturers, with some of the platforms, they all seem to be financing those deals with each other's stocks and each other's pieces of, it's like, is it the same dollar that's being spent 15 different times? And I'll share the meme that kind of brought this out so that people can see what those IOUs look like. But I wanted to have a conversation with you, Ron, about if you can kind of help us figure out where did this come from and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's half 1999 and half 2007. On the one hand, it's got some elements of the internet bubble where the transformational technology that's being delivered via artificial intelligence has the capability of obviously altering the way in which we work and live and play. And then on the other hand, some of that circular financing that you're talking about has some characteristics of the credit crisis that we had in 2008 and 9. There's circular financing, there's off balance sheet funding vehicles, or companies lending to each other to buy their own stuff, which is, could also be a circular.
I can't imagine who you're talking about with that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a circular firing squad if things go the wrong way. And so I think there are two big questions. Number one, although some of this has been corrected lately, are valuations for the publicly traded entities too high relative to the profits they're ultimately going to earn in the future, particularly as AI gets commoditized over time? And then number two, will they earn enough money to support the debt that's being used to finance the build out of all this AI infrastructure? And we don't have an immediate answer to this. Look, I think, David, you and I have been doing this long enough to know what the answer is, which is at some point there's going to be a problem, right? And
Yeah.
it'll either be that the stocks are overvalued and they take a much bigger drop than they've already had, or you have some sort of event that prevents them from being as profitable as they could have otherwise been. An electricity shortage, just not delivering on their profitability. Somebody defaults on a big piece of debt. Next thing you know, everybody else does as well. And you get that, death spiral or doom loop, whatever you want to call it. And it creates a financial market problem that may or may not threaten the economy. I don't think we can figure that piece out yet. But certainly there's enough money sloshing around in potentially bad deals that you could have. I wouldn't compare it to '08 fully. That was a global systemic financial crisis that took everybody out. It wasn't just us. Other countries were, equally hard hit. I think it's a little different than that, but it still could be meaningful.
Yeah, and the other piece that's in that puzzle to think about is the long-term effect, assuming that this AI boom is successful, which is AI doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah, no,
AI doesn't pay Social Security. Where is the revenue going to come from? Are we going to have to figure out a new way of funding the government? Because if there are that many people that are losing their jobs, in the hundreds of thousands at this point over the last couple of years, how will we be able to afford the government?
if nobody's working and nobody's paying income taxes, which, total almost $3 trillion a year, where does that money come from then to fund universal basic income that's supposed to give us a living wage even as we don't work? I wrote about that in my Substack this week, in fact, because it came out at the same time as this so-called Citrini report, which was a scenario that kind of asks very similar questions. What happens if 50% of all entry level white collar jobs go away in the next 1 to 5 years? What happens when robots, thoroughly dominate Amazon's warehouses, and instead of having 1.8 million employees, they have 1.8 million robots, with autonomous vehicles delivering stuff or drones. Um, and most of the labor economists, Claudia Sam and others, suggest that we will see other jobs that we haven't even thought of emerge. And it's interesting. Drew Mattis was on a market strategist talking about how a liberal arts degree is going to be very important again because soft skills, interpersonal relations, things that you can't do with AI will move to the forefront of job creation. You're not going to have AI building a house. You're not going to have AI doing certain things that it simply can't do unless there's a human involved. And then the types of jobs in artificial intelligence will be higher quality, higher skill, higher pay, but there'll be far fewer of them. So it's really a mixed bag. I don't think anybody really has a handle on this yet. So I don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet. I have a lot of concerns about this because I've used some of these tools and they are extraordinarily fast. I've used them most for research,
Mhm.
but I've seen younger kids, my kids in particular, use some of these tools to create, minimum viable products if they're starting a business and doing it entirely on their own. And there are people who say, you can run 100 companies by yourself because you have all these AI agents that can do all this work for you. I don't know if you can have 100 good ideas. That's a separate question.
Yeah.
But,
It certainly has consolidated the process
yeah,
if you use them correctly, and a lot of people don't use them correctly. You got a lot of famous court cases where lawyers are not looking at what they submit, and I won't go into that or the hallucinations, but if
yeah.
you use the process correctly, if you take your ideas, let the tools organize them, and then go back on the back end and edit. I mean, I've cut my writing process down from days to hours,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with that, unless, of course, it's killing the world economy, and we're all going to have to figure out how to grow our own food.
And yeah, and it's shrinking your brain. I mean, there's some concern about, your cognitive abilities. The more and more you let, artificial intelligence do brain work for you, that it could have a deleterious impact on your cognitive ability over time, which, as we know from, our experience up till today, the less you use your brain, the more inclined, particularly as you get older, the more inclined you are to get Alzheimer's or something like that. Which, for you and me, we're kind of you sit around and go, hey, I don't, it's not really where I want to be 5 years from now.
What's your name again? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so
And the funny thing is, I refuse to use it for writing. I absolutely refuse. I like the discipline of writing. I use it for research, and it's much easier to pull data than even during the internet days, right? I mean, if you, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, you go in and or Perplexity and you need some information, it's there, in an instant.
it
Um,
doesn't link you to the manual on how to fly the plane. It tells you where to grab the stick and land it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, exactly. And so, but I like the writing process. I mean, it's a discipline that I, like to engage in, and it also, again, as I get older, it helps keep me sharp. But yeah, look, there are a lot of questions around, how this is going to impact younger people in particular. We're seeing young folks write their job applications with AI. HR is reading it with AI, and nobody's getting hired. I mean, so it'd be nice if they showed up and did an interview.
So I guess the overall question, specifically from the economic side,
Yeah.
is, and I know you probably can't answer this, so I'm just asking your opinion. How intertwined are all of these various deals, and how risky are things right now? And not looking for financial advice or
Yeah.
investment advice, but again, I don't want to be in another one of those situations where one butterfly flaps its wings wrong and the economy collapses.
Yeah, so I'm not in the economy collapse camp at the moment. I do worry that we're 6 to 12 months away from a market event that's going to be driven by one or two or three things. Number one, in the very, very short term, an open-ended war with Iran could be problematic insofar as oil prices spike, stock market sells off. Generally, geopolitical things don't create an economic crisis. But once again, Iran, to the extent it controls the Strait of Hormuz, that's 20 to 30% of the world's oil that passes through there on a daily basis, could create some discomfort, if you will. Secondly, what you're talking about with respect to AI, circular financing, deals going bad, and having lenders and other companies on the hook for it. The same way in which, if you go back to 1989, Japanese companies had this cross ownership that they called Keiretsu. And so each, if you had a Mitsubishi bank, it owned Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, it owned a piece of Mitsubishi Motors, it owned a piece of Mitsubishi Electronics. And on the way up, that all worked. On the way down, when that leverage unwound, you had a collapse in their equity market, right? That it took 34 years to go back to all-time highs. I don't see that here. And the third piece, which I think to a certain extent to me is a little more worrying, is the potential for a private credit crisis because it's so opaque, because we don't know what's going on in the lending world in private credit, which they're trying to, by the way, stuff into your 401k. As credit quality deteriorates, and some of it we can't see, I think that might pose a bigger risk to the financial markets. And again, how much of an impact it has on the economy, I think, is determined by how much it impairs the banking sector. That's where the linkage comes, right? If the banks struggle and start to look like, not going to go as far as being insolvent, but start to look impaired, then that has a bleed through to the economy, and slows things down, creates a recession. The difference here is the Fed and the federal government don't have the same flexibility they've had in prior crises to bail things out and to really get us in a situation where just lower interest rates would kind of save the day. So I think it's a more complex environment. And again, I think there are three worries: geopolitical, AI, and private credit. And my speech topic this year has been everything, everywhere, all at once. And I think that's kind of the way we have to like live for a little while, because it could be any one or all of those things happening simultaneously that takes us off track.
If I'm the technologist that's dealing with this technology, what should I be doing? And I'm going to also, the second question I'm going to ask you is if I'm the private investor, how can I protect myself? What's the smartest thing to do to protect myself? So, but first of all, from the technologist side, because we've got a lot of people that watch this, in the
Yeah.
UC, in the collaboration space, in the compute space, should I be doing anything differently? Should I figure out how to farm and plumb and, I'm not going to be typing on computers anymore?
Yeah, somehow I think we all should have figured that one out a long time ago,
Right.
just as a safety valve.
Well, I can change washers and I can change seats, but now I find out all the faucets in my house are washerless and don't use seats anymore. So it's like, what good is that knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, my older brother can tap electrical wire, electrical outlets. I can't do it. I've never been able to do it, right? I have no such basic skills that would be required.
Well,
And
I can do electrical, but anyway,
yeah,
that's a different story.
we were on opposite sides of the camera, so
Yeah, there you go. Right.
I learned how to sit still. You know, look, I don't know. I think, and I've always felt this, right? I mean, if you're not paying attention, number one, to your own company stock price, if it's publicly traded, right? If you don't have your ear to the ground inside the company, you're going to get blindsided, right? So I think, being forewarned is being forearmed. And so I think that's critical first and foremost, is to understand the context in which you're working, and then look at similarly situated companies to see what's happening there. Again, so you don't get blindsided. Like, a block is laying off 40% of its staff. Say, part of it is that they overhired, post pandemic, and part of it is they're reducing their workforce because of AI agents, right?
Remind me, we'll come back to that, but keep going.
So I think, and you have to look, I think, people are well within their rights to be asking their managers what's going on and pressing them for answers. And, is this something that's in our future? Because most companies are openly admitting right now that they're going to reduce their workforces. Even Jamie Dimon said that there's going to have to be a kind of reconfiguration of the company as a consequence of AI. And if you're in financial services, if you're a technologist, if you're anywhere in the back office, if you're a paralegal, you have to look and try to determine whether there's some now emerging obsolescence for the skills that you have, right? I mean, if you're reading, AI can read a legal brief, summarize it in a matter of minutes, and that took a couple of days for a paralegal. You're at risk. If you're in a back office job that just consolidates data, you are at risk, right? So you really should be aware of the risks that exist in your job. Upskill if you can, you know. And again, and I think what everybody says across the spectrum is if you're not learning and making use of these tools to enhance your own prospects, you will get left behind. And I think that's
Yeah.
critical because it's native to the young people, right?
Mhm.
Just as, we adopted the internet, we were a little older when it hit, right? But for the youngest people who knew how to handle it, they grew up with Nothing's a surprise. They've grown up with social media. Now they're in their 20s in many cases, and all these products are effectively and services are native to them, and they're way better at using them than we are. So even as you get older, adopting those skills and adapting at the same time is critical to your longevity.
All right. So, and if you're somebody like me that's, 5, 10, 15 years away from retirement, what should we be doing to protect ourselves in terms of if there's a nest egg, if we're lucky enough to not be living day to day?
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet. I mean, listen, if Anthropic had cut the deal with the Department of War to take the governors off its defense capabilities and launch missiles without any human supervision, I'd be talking about moving to Canada and farming, someplace, near the border. Because God knows it's like war games, right? I mean, it's the
There's a difference between talking about and planning.
yeah.
Everybody's talking about it now, but yeah,
Yeah, I look and the worst case scenario is really hard to plan for because it requires, you know, um, a reversion to a life we don't know, right? I mean, it's like if you're trying to say you're going to go out and farm somewhere, farming is not easy, right? I mean, it's like it's harder than most of the stuff we do, right?
no, that's not true. Farming is easy. You plant or you water. Farming is hard to scale.
Scale, yes,
That's the
yes.
problem.
And even subsistence farming at this point would be difficult for most people, right? They
It's
just don't
true.
know, right? And and all the inputs that you need to be effective at it. Well, I do think, even at our age, and I have my kids they're all over me about learning to use, whether it's, Gemini or now Claude is the most popular thing among particularly my youngest, who's in fintech. She's like, Dad, why aren't you using Claude? And I'm like, well, I have limited need for it. So, yeah, okay, I get it. And I'm older than you are, so I'm closer to riding it out. But I do upskilling, and also again the development of interpersonal skills, soft skills, and those types of things that can buffer your experience a little bit so that you're less vulnerable to being disrupted. It really depends on the industry you're in. I mean, look,
Mhm.
it's going to be really hard for AI to sell houses, right? It's going to be really hard. Maybe not cars because you can do that off the internet, to a certain extent. But there are a lot of jobs that will require the human touch.
Sure.
But there's a lot that will go away as well. So,
But let's not lose sight of the concept of what am I doing with my money? How do
I
I
don't think
protect
I don't know
myself?
how much you do differently other than I started talking in January of 2025 about diversifying the portfolio away from the United States for a wide variety of reasons, right? Number one, I thought the dollar was going to go down, which it has. And so if you buy overseas stocks and the dollar is going down, your repatriated profits come back larger, right?
Mhm.
Just on that notion alone. And politics and everything else, may play a role in that decision-making process for some of us. Um, and the relative status of the United States, is being questioned and challenged by China. So overseas markets have outperformed the U.S. by an extremely wide margin last year and so far this year. And so diversification is important. Again, not being overly concentrated in these companies that we have questions about, right? I mean, they've already come down a lot. I would say avoiding the sales pitch from advisors about stuffing private credit into your 401k when we think there's about to be an event that, you don't want to be the bag holder, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's made a lot of money in that sector already. And if you're the last one in, that's usually never a good sign. So, it's being careful, it's being thoughtful. Um, there's no real that I can think of outside of Japan, and again also 1966 to let's say 1984. There are no extended periods in which the market wasn't higher 20 years down the road relative to the prior 20 years. So you buy the S&P, and hold on to it, and maybe you buy a little more value over growth, and maybe you tilt a portion of your portfolio overseas for a period of time. That's a tactical trade, though. You have to be really careful on that one. If the dollar starts popping back up or rips to the upside, that kills your profits.
Gotta move. Yeah.
But I think you have to, instead of just owning the S&P and the Qs, I think you have to be more broad-minded about what you own. Now, hopefully, a lot of people own their own homes as well, where there's an extraordinary amount of equity, and that too is kind of a buffer. You know,
And the housing market is also insane right now. So I mean, I could sell my house for 20 times what I paid for it, but then I couldn't live anywhere.
And,
So
and look, that's the problem. So this lock-in problem that we have in real estate, where you have a 3% mortgage, and were you to downsize, it would cost you more to move into a smaller house than the house you're currently living in. That is a problem for baby boomers and front end and back end baby boomers. I mean, they're all stuck in this spot now because, in a weird way, unlike our kids or millennials who would be a little older than my kids, um, we managed to do things that put us in a position where even the great financial crisis, even the pandemic, while it interrupted our progress, it didn't stop it. For some of these kids, they've not had a chance to buy a house. They've not had a chance
mhm,
to do some things that we had a chance to do because the pandemic also radically altered, their lifestyle,
yeah.
their job prospects, and a whole host of other, things that we never thought about. Um, so, yeah, if you're sitting on a lot of home equity, you can tap it, to a certain extent, but then you're paying back the loan.
Yeah.
So,
Different, yeah.
yeah,
All right. So in the last few minutes that we have, I want to throw a curveball at you. I want to get your opinion on something. I'm going to give a
I was always a
presentation.
fastball hitter, but okay.
I'll throw it at you fast. We
Yeah.
have a few more minutes. I'm going to give a presentation at one of my large trade shows this year in June at Infocom, where I'm going to be giving advice. I'm stunned, by the way, they actually approved this presentation because I never thought it would get through. I've been proposing it for a year, where I'm saying that as we write RFPs, as we're technology managers to bring in things, one of the things in the RFPs needs to be looking at workforce reductions from companies. And if companies have had more than a 10% workforce reduction, the profitable companies, not
Yeah.
struggling companies,
Right, right, right.
wildly profitable companies have had more than a 10% workforce reduction, then we want to see who it is in the C-suite they've let go because they overhired. And if it's more than a 20%, we want to see the entire C-suite is gone. And if it's more than 25%, we're going to disqualify them
Yeah.
because what it means is they care more about shareholder value than about long-term product quality and customer experience. Do you think that that's going to at least at some point have some legs in that these companies that are making money hand over fist, but doing workforce reductions for short-term bumps, there's going to be a price to pay at some point, and we should, as buyers, be taking that into consideration as we pick technology partners?
Yeah, I've kind of felt that way since the 80s, although the 90s were a little bit different because everything seemed to go right for a period of eight or so years. Um, Even as companies laid workers off, you did have this more generalized sense of prosperity. But you're getting you're getting to a question that's going to be really critical going forward. Is the income inequality gap? Is this kind of unfair distribution of income and opportunity going to lead to a moment where there are pitchforks in the street, right? I mean, on the one hand, Elon Musk this year may very well become a trillionaire, and then you have an enormous number of Americans who can't pay $1,000, emergency cost, and some of that comes from what you're asking, which is, if if they're going to engage in layoffs that do not include oftentimes a management group that lacks imagination to solve specific problems, will there be social upheaval? I tend to think there will be at some juncture if it really gets out of control. And again, yeah, you lay off 50% of your staff, and we referenced Block earlier, 40% of the staff is going, and they're using AI, but again, they also overhired post-pandemic. That is a big number, and either it tells you that Jack Dorsey's been asleep at the switch for the last 5 years, and hasn't thought any of this through and hasn't seen any of this coming. And he himself, who founded Twitter as a technologist, didn't figure it out till now, and didn't begin to gradually right size the company or
Or was just looking for the most convenient excuse.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think, more often than not, that's the case, right? I mean, we've seen this at other periods, and people use the tariffs as an excuse. People use events that take place that garner headlines as excuses to, riff people, reduce and force. The question now is, and I think this is really relevant, right? There are two people I'll cite when we talk about this stuff who figured out that you have to first and foremost, pay your employees enough so they can afford to buy the product they're making, right? And you could argue about Henry Ford and whatever kinds of personal and social problems he had.
But he got that part of it.
He got that part of it. He knew that if you wanted to buy a Model T, and you're working for Ford, you ought to be able to buy a Model T with your salary, right? And Milton Hershey was another who built an entire community around, the chocolatier and provided education, housing, and adequate pay. And across the board, I think in many ways, American companies in particular have lost sight of that kind of stakeholder view. It is the shareholder, it's the investor, it's the consumer, it is the employee. They're all in a certain sense equally important. And if you don't take care of those people, you run the risk of a death spiral in your company. And but again, also if management's not accountable, that's an even bigger problem.
There's got to be some pain on the management side for those massive layoffs, whether
And
it's
not just middle managers, right? I mean, look,
no.
these guys who have run companies into the ground and then, package out with hundreds of millions of dollars or more, you know, it's not just economically unsound in my mind, and this will come off too strong potentially, but it is, if not unethical, also immoral. It's just it's pillaging.
I've come up with some ideas, again, they'll never fly, but the idea that, especially in the US where healthcare is covered by the employer, that if you want to lay off 10% or more of your staff, that you have to cover their healthcare costs for the next 5 years.
And not with
Something,
Cobra.
right, something that would
Cobra
be so
sucks.
painful that
Yes.
the pain of the move would be shared.
Yeah.
And if it needed to be shared, then it was a worthwhile move. But if it didn't need to be shared, then maybe you don't do it. So that's yeah, we'll let
The
that be
other
the
part
last
too.
word.
Yeah, well,
There,
just the other part is that lack of imagination, right? The leaders who can't see change coming until it's too late, that's not the employee's fault. And then management misses a turn, and the next thing you know, 10 or 20% of the workforce is gone, and it's not their fault. So yeah,
and a
there
lot
should
of
be,
institutional knowledge disappears with that as well.
which is
And
critical. I mean, listen, we know that, right? I mean, quite frankly, I can walk into my old employer and nobody knows who I am. And I don't mean that in the sense that, hey, I've been on TV, people should know who I am. I mean, like, nobody knows that I ever worked there. It's when institutional knowledge
I hear
walks
you.
out the door, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and then nobody knows what to do when the widget breaks, and you were the guy that knew. So, Ron, where
Yeah,
can
yeah,
people find out
exactly.
more information if they want to reach out to you and want to find out what you're doing? Tell us again.
Certainly LinkedIn, certainly Twitter, certainly Instagram. I don't think I'm on TikTok except to watch comedy clips. And then I have a Substack entitled The Message of the Markets, which at the very least I write once a week what I'm watching so you don't have to. That kind of summarizes what's transpired and what you may have missed that you really want to know about.
Ron, it's always a pleasure. I love
Yeah,
staying
it's
in
good to
touch
see
with
you,
you.
David.
We'll have
Same.
you back on again. And thank you very much for watching as you do every week. And we will see you next week. Take care.